Waikokwaitep, Rusquestri, Tiffany Traverse, Sequepmuka, Stlaka ta Sequepmukulu, ta Chuchua es le Sedekwa, Mutka na Progress BC. Hi everyone, I just wanted to welcome everyone here to the keynote speech. I'm so honored that I get to be opening it up for us after what's been probably a really challenging couple weeks for most of us, coming off the heels of a very challenging time at COP26 in Glasgow for a few of us, coming back home to BC to devastating floods, landslides, and also some of our Wet'suwet'en kin and allies being arrested and taken from their traditional territories. And you know, all of this stuff is happening around us, and it's rare where you find someone who really embodies a beacon of light. And I just am so honored that I get the chance to work alongside Amma at SeedChange as a member of their board. So before joining SeedChange as executive director in 2021, Amma spent 15 years as a leading activist for food sovereignty and food justice, and 4 years as the executive director of Black Creek Community Farm, where she worked towards greater food justice with the Toronto community of Jane Finch. She was instrumental in the creation of a number of initiatives in Toronto, including Jane Finch on the Move, Jane Finch Action Against Poverty, Jane Finch Political Conversation Cafe, Black Creek Food Justice Network, and Mothers in Motion. Amma is currently completing a master's degree at York University, looking at how decolonization, agroecology, and the expertise of women elders in small-scale farming communities can support much-needed shifts in the way we think of our relationships and with each other and other living beings. And I'm just so honored to be working alongside a beacon such as Amma, where her and I get to share this space together in not only dismantling power structures within institutions, but also working together to decolonize philanthropy together. So without further ado, over to you, Amma.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for that really, really warm introduction. And likewise, I'm also very honored to have the opportunity to work with you as well. Of course, I'm honored to give the keynote address today for the National Farmers Union Convention. I'm, of course, most honored to continue my work for food sovereignty, farmers' rights, Indigenous-led climate solutions, not only in this country, but globally. I come to you today from the unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. I also recognize that many people are here on this land involuntarily, particularly people of African descent who were brought here as part of the transatlantic slave trade, and many migrants and refugees from the global South. The struggles against anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism are our struggles, as is our collective fight against capitalism, and are intricately tied up in the struggle for food sovereignty. I want to take a moment for all of us, as Tiffany mentioned, to reflect on the current flooding in BC. I want us to think about the families in the Caribbean, especially displaced families in Haiti, across Asia and Africa. I want us to also think about the families that are displaced, the Indigenous communities who have warned us from time immemorial about the impacts of deforestation, the migrant farm workers who, despite their role in feeding our communities, are always last or not even thought about in a crisis like these. Our farmers who have been impacted. Now more than ever, the situation we find ourselves in with respect to climate justice demands that we think of many different places at once. This is actually my first time giving a keynote address since I started my work in food justice, and my first public speaking engagement since taking on the role as executive director at SeedChange. So do bear with me. I will be sharing a few slides with you as I speak, sharing a documentary film work as well as some preliminary findings from my ongoing research. And also I want to give a bit of institutional context as I see it. You know, many of us have participated in diversity and inclusion training initiatives. In fact, EDI is institutionally in fashion of late. Many of us have also likely led and facilitated these training sessions ourselves. Many of us have also participated in countless consultations, surveys, and conducted research to arrive at this point where we find ourselves with a profoundly broken and still breaking world. In this keynote, I meditate on where we in the agriculture sector find ourselves at the other end of all these equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives. Leaning on my work with African indigenous women farmers, I propose the idea that rather than diversifying a profoundly broken and uneven system, we should pursue a much more difficult and worthwhile end, justice. As has been repeatedly flagged by peasant farmers, grassroots groups, indigenous people globally, pursuing more robust and just food systems demand that we grapple with the reality that the core sickness of our food systems is capitalism that is drenched in white supremacy. So I also want to share also a little bit about myself. I grew up in a small town in the Kwao Eastern region of Ghana called Pepiase. I was raised by my grandmother who was a farmer. She raised me, my cousins, and her 11 children on a small plot of land. Farming, if you ask my grandmother, was a way of life, a necessity. I immigrated to Canada at the age of 12 years old. We moved into Jane and Finch, one of the most vibrant communities in Toronto, with so many community leaders and grassroots groups. And if I may brag, I think none that we've ever seen in other urban centers across the country. When I started in this field of work, I did not understand the terms food sovereignty or food justice. I've been organizing on the streets of Toronto in Jane and Finch, pushing against the special diet cuts to Ontario welfare, joining labor movements, fighting for affordable housing. And yet the terms food justice and food sovereignty was not something I was familiar with even though that was, of course, essentially the work I and other women in my community had been leading. These are terms I believe we throw around a lot, but what does it really mean? And how can we really achieve justice within our workplaces, farms, and society? I remember many nights cramped in the farmhouse at the Black Creek Community Farm, discussing what the project needed to look like in order to serve our communities. A Black woman walked up to me and said, "I've been attending these meetings. People here use big words like food justice, food sovereignty. I was at the grocery store and the security guard emptied my purse on the conveyor belt in front of my 9-year-old son and other customers. They accused me of stealing. Is that what food justice means?" At that moment, I realized how insular and esoteric food justice and food sovereignty work could be, how exclusionary it could feel for the specific residents on whose behalf we claim to be doing this work. What point was the work we were doing? And my learning all these terms, if it alienated my fellow community members. This was an important lesson that I take with me in doing this work every day. And something too that I ponder through and try to make sure as I journey through this work that I can stay true to the core piece of the work. In fact, when we check the box on hiring of Black people at the farm, we did well, right? It's like, do you have Black people? Do you have indigenous people? I think we checked all the boxes when it came to that, but yet we operated under an institution that continued to exploit community residents. You see, we have a food system that exploits the poor, Black and brown people. They also make up a majority of the people that feed us. Like if you go to farms across Southern Ontario, you're going to see Black and brown bodies on the fields. When we look at the inequities within our food system, it's also the same people who are at the bottom. You know, a recent proof study found that Black and Indigenous people in Canada are facing food insecurity at a rate of 1 in 3. You know, before the pandemic, 4.4 million Canadians were food insecure. During the pandemic, that number is of course set to be much closer to 6 million Canadians. The ongoing pandemic has exposed food justice and multiple layers of inequities within our society. The year has also brought to our attention again and again the ongoing countless murdered and missing Indigenous women, ongoing police brutality, state violence from the streets of Nigeria, US, the Philippines, Toronto, and reserves here at home in Canada, and to the thousands of children who were killed as a result of the residential school system. I'm also today thinking a lot about folks in Mali, Ethiopia, Sudan, Afghanistan, and Palestine. The pandemic has also exacerbated many people's mental health challenges. Many organizations are having to look at health and safety very differently, including health as a work safety issue. Of course, as we all know, mental health among our farmers is astronomical. You know, I believe that at the beginning of the pandemic, as people were confronted by the issues of inequality, more people asking questions about food insecurity and what it means for other communities, but also themselves, and what are the ways that we can also pull together support to help the most marginalized within our society. Many people are still challenged with working from home and taking care of families. You know, the COP26 conference, I'm sure there's tons folks here have to say about that. The recent UN Food Systems Summit is, of course, I think, a really cause for concern, a reason for all of us to be concerned. But yet, I am very encouraged by the thousands of social movements, collective, peasant farmers who give me hope in how we can strengthen our partnerships across the globe. I am really inspired by Indigenous land defenders in Wet'suwet'en and on the front lines of the Amazon, and the many Indigenous women from the global South who took up space and reminded us again that there is no climate solution without Indigenous women. You see, we can never forget that our fights here on this land are forever tied to land defenders' fight across the globe. The same mining companies destroying Asian lands here are the same corporations mining and destroying lands in Ghana and in many countries in the global South. Solidarity seeped in justice is our only salvation, and EDI has no chance. But lip service solidarity cannot just be words, but has to be actionable. I want you to forget about anti-oppression training, forget diversity and inclusion training. If the basis of all this is not about justice, if it's not about land back, if it's not about dismantling these systems that continue to oppress the most marginalized within our society, then what exactly are we doing? Are we here just to maintain the status quo? You know, we live on one planet, you know, forget borders and walls. What we do here has an impact elsewhere. You know, the truth to the matter is that the whole continent of Africa is responsible for less than 5% of the global carbon emissions, and yet face major impact of land degradation, deforestation, biodiversity loss, and other climate change vulnerabilities. We are encouraged to engage in systems and institutions that continue to harm us. We have countless reports, surveys, consultations, and meetings that say the same thing. We keep having the same conversation from conference to conference. We keep using new terminologies basically to describe some of the same issues. I was telling a friend of mine, actually, I'm watching a video from the Jane and Finch community, I think back in the 80s, and just hearing that they are talking about the same issues that we're talking about now within the same. So it doesn't matter what new terminologies we come to describe the issues, right? It is what it is. So are we asking ourselves, I'm sure we are asking ourselves right now, how do we come together for the common good for our society? I want to share some raw footage with you from my birthplace in Kwao-Pipiase. There are no subtitles. It is in my language tree. I want you to listen, and I want you to just feel the atmosphere in this film. It's actually part of my ongoing research, and this is the first time that I'm sharing that publicly. So if Tim, if it's okay, if you can share that with folks, thank you.
The format too. Hey, Brian got, but someone say me I'm quite. Ah, I don't much more. Huh? No. Ah, okay. All sort for me. So I point it, bra. Ah, and then I mean, some more corner. Wow. I took a mass with done by the choir. If I come like crackle.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, call me. I never do more fat sister Mary. They are tears and tears. I know I say, call her. They are tears and tears. Is it here and tag him one? Nothing. You're for any air cock with you. Yeah, and cut your soon.
Nsu ento ntama banchi bia ho ayeden ebi ton bi wo ba bi ye ni sky de beto ye wo sky de beto anke betimi akoto ni bebre na nka ye de abedua na ye kese ya me amfa ha hey ana na de ana na de nya duma ketewa enti mo mboa ye sika from aye fanya fuo ne kese ye mo ka mo me ba binie me dia de maso na dia fuo ne ho kwa eti afuo na mu ni minam ya me koi kese pa no so wa ha eti mo mla de se ye hia mo mo apa mo pese mo boa ye dia ye nso ma no so ye nso ye be boa mo eti mo mo aye hia so ye mo am
Domane efwa santua wa be si wo mu ono kura de mi ko fi esi asa ko hwe na ma me ko school ya kwa ba ya pasi aba ebeshi ye wona da kaka oba be si a we o be da ado we di ahwa o ma da be ya be na o be da yi ya de tu ya no no
Thank you so much, Tim. So it's very, very raw footage, and it's part of my ongoing research, which really considers the role of Indigenous women in regenerative food production. Of course, it's inspired by my grandmother. She's the matriarch of our family, and she utilized her smallholder farm not only to feed her children, but her grandchildren and her whole community. When I search the term farmer on the internet, the images that come up are dominantly men, or more specifically, white men. And yet Indigenous women play a core role in feeding communities worldwide. According to Growing Culture, which is an international organization that works with peasant movement, women make up about 70% of the 1.5 billion smallholder farmers globally. So my research examines the work of Indigenous women in food cultivation in Ghana, then finding and working through connections between those practices with a food grower here in Canada. Connecting these places and practices was key to my food story in Ghana and to my home here in Canada. And it builds a narrative that highlights smallholder farm issues as not isolated to distant lands, but by connecting my research in Ghana to Canada, while also reflecting on my work at the Black Creek Community Farm and in my former neighborhood in Toronto. I center Indigenous and Black cultural food growing practices. I want to understand and make connections between these ancestral practices and generative food systems. As you can also see in the film, you know, the tools that the women are using. Like, I want you to also to kind of take note of the tools that they have at hand that they're using to really feed us. So my research also considers the relationship between gender, race, equity, land stewardship, and agroecological integrity, which are fundamental issues, of course, to global and planetary health. So, and also women are also leading the way in regenerative and organic agriculture, and they help to kind of rebuild soil health, reduce water consumption, while also mitigating climate change. Centering the perspectives of decolonization and agroecology, of course, pushes us to think differently about our relationship with one another and with other beings as well. And this research is of course very much aligned with my work at SeedChange, an organization that is very dear to my heart. I'm going to share some slides with you about the work I'm doing at SeedChange. Yeah, Canada. Thanks, Tim. Tim, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. In terms of SeedChange, we're active in about 12 different countries around the world. And our focus is, of course, our mission is, of course, to build food sovereignty by working with farmers across around the world to enhance biodiversity, promote climate resilient agriculture, and counter inequity. Next slide, please. So our role, you know, it's part of what is built in SeedChange's work is the work that we do, the important work that we do with local partners. So working with local organizations that support some of the local initiatives and civil society as well. And instead of focusing on you know, aid or international development, we use the framework of food sovereignty and solidarity. And we support farmers in 5 ways, you know, as trainers, as facilitators, as knowledge sharers, and connecting people. One of the things that I like about our organization is that, you know, there's always this idea that knowledge comes from the north and then it's given to the south. But actually, I think one of the things as SeedChange, as an organization, I've been able to do really well is really taking that knowledge and sharing knowledge also from the South with the North as well in terms of how we can do better. And our partnership framework is really around, is grounded in solidarity, equality, and mutual recognition of shared values and goals. Of course, there are inherent inequalities in decision-making related to NGO role and Northern NGOs specifically as well. We recently drafted principles to encourage and guide discussions around partnership internally, and we also engage with partners around some of that, so that the relationships that we're having with them is one that is based on that mutual solidarity for our planet. So one of the programs is around the seeds of survival. I'm sure many folks here, I'm speaking to the choir really, have heard of Dr. Malaku and the Seeds of Survival program, which started in Ethiopia during the 1980s, and is a global hotspot of seed diversity. Ethiopia was facing famine, and really the reason why we're called SeedChange, or not called SeedChange, but the reason why SeedChange as an organization started doing work around seeds is really because of Dr. Malaku's, brilliance in terms of looking at the core food security systems that communities needed to have in place, and not just food aid solutions to some of that work. Next slide. Sorry, I forgot, Tim, I forgot to say next slide. You can go to slide number 6. Thank you. And one of the things I wanted to say, so from the early days in Ethiopia, SeedChange continued to learn from farmers about the importance of seed diversity for food security, good livelihoods, and food sovereignty. And this work, of course, became our exclusive focus, as I mentioned, back in 2007. Next slide, please. So, I don't think I need to go too much into details around this, but through our works through partnerships, these are some of the people at the community level doing the most important work in Honduras. Isidora is a farmer facilitator and has organized women's groups since she was 18. With her husband, she worked on trying to seek community land. And the land that they had, of course, is very slope and difficult to farm, but they work with neighbors, to create incredible biodiverse farms and help others to do the same as well, also within her community. Next slide. Though we have developed a specialized toolkit in seed work, more broadly, our work aims to support justice, health, and sustainability for farmers. We do this by supporting agroecology, which is farmer-led approach to farming that focuses on ecological methods to produce food, and working with partners to develop programs that address that as well. Next slide, Tim. And during the COVID, so what has SeedChange been doing during the COVID? So during the pandemic, with support from Global Affairs Canada, we were able to support over 6,000 participants in rural and indigenous communities of Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua to increase their food and economic security during the pandemic, and spread health messages and help address gender-based violence as well. So we work with 5 partners actually in Central America on this work. So a lot of the work is, of course, very focused on women's access to productive resources. Next slide. So the other program that I'm sure a lot of folks from the NFU and who are here are very much aware of is our ABAUDA, the Canadian Seed Security Initiative program. So the mission, of course, of this program is to support farmer-led regional seed systems in the country that advance food sovereignty, and is also resilient in the face of climate change. And the whole reason that this project started was because, as we all know, the world is experiencing agricultural biodiversity loss at an alarming rate, and Canada is no different. A lot of the seeds that, a lot of the seed diversity in Canada is in gene banks and not in the hands of growers. And a lot of the varieties that we do use are imported from other countries. But it's not enough to save the diversity that we are at risk of losing. We have to use it, and we have to adapt it, and we have to get into the hands of farmers and seed growers, and we have to add to it. And we want to make sure that that seed diversity is useful in kinds of agroecological farming conditions, and we want to support. And right now, farmers do not have access to enough quantity grains and vegetable seeds that are, regionally produced and have been bred, adapted to agroecological farming conditions. So, yeah, so in terms of some of the wins from that is the fact that we've been able to expand Seeds of Diversity Canada's historically significant seed collection from 1,400 varieties in 2013 to over 6,000 varieties in 2018. Next slide, Tim. So in terms of our programs, it means we support farmers in doing three things, conserve seed diversity, supporting farmers and gardeners who want to save agricultural significant varieties on their farms and gardens. And we do that through a long-standing partnership with Seeds of Diversity Canada, regional seed bank libraries across the country. Next slide. And two, adapting or improving seed diversity. This is when we shift our work to move more farm scale operations and work with farmers that are interested in scaling up vegetable production on their farms or adopting heritage varieties for diversified grain operations. We support these kinds of activities through seed production programs, farmer training, or farmer-to-farmer training. Next slide. And the third is like creating new diversity. This is how this has slowly turned into our flagship program, which is to support participatory plant breeding and variety improvement projects with farmers who want to develop new varieties and grains and vegetables for organic and agroecological conditions. Next slide. And then another piece of our work is training and capacity building. So creating as many opportunities as we can for farmer-to-farmer learning, both in the field during the season and at conferences and online throughout the year. Next slide. And then the other big piece is also policy and advocacy. So the third pillar of our work around policy, which is still slowly developing, but the primary focus of our policy work is to figure out how better, better enabled of all the field programming that we're doing, either through changes in legislation and advocacy for more government supports. Next slide, Tim. And then the other part of our work is with, we're part of a coalition of the Farmers for Climate Solutions, which I'm sure some of you are actually members of. So do forgive me if I butchered this a little bit, but Farmers for Climate Solutions has over 22 member organizations. SeedChange is one of the founding members when it launched in February 2022. And we are still sort of the administrative body for Farmers for Climate Solutions. Next slide. So what is the aim for Farmers for Climate Solutions in terms of agriculture, Canadian agriculture policy work? I think it's basically the three streams, which is farmer engagement, so positioning farmers as leading voices, calling for climate action, and then public engagement, which is building a stronger constituent of supportive non-farmers who support the vision, and then government relations, which is engaging decision makers to advance policies to spread climate solutions in Canadian agriculture. Next slide. And this is just some of the images in terms of some of the work that folks have been doing, which is around the Build Back Better. So I think it's a hashtag that folks can follow too if you're interested in learning a bit more. And one of the, I think the big pieces or wins that came out of this was the federal government announcement of $200 million for On-Farm Climate Action Fund. And why I think this is important and working is that, you know, the time has come. People really do want to hear from farmers. I think, as I mentioned in my earlier talk around the fact that we have a really cultivated audience right now that are really interested in the issues, and governments are actually responding to farmers, and they're demonstrating coordination also across the sector, which is really putting forward evidence-based solutions that is validated by farmers. Next slide. Sorry, you can go to the next one. I realized that I forgot to say next slide. So at SeedChange, one of the things that we are trying to sort of do well and do better at is really our commitment to take action for decolonization. So one, raising funds for Indigenous-led work within Canada, providing backbone support, increasing visibility of Indigenous leadership within our international work, and then developing Indigenous staff positions that are culturally responsive, and then supporting Indigenous employees around cultural food sovereignty skills and community engagement as part of that. And to add to this, of course, it's with Indigenous communities' consent as well. Next slide, please. And one last piece is that the NFU, of course, supports the Bowder Seed Initiative in putting together educational materials for farmers involved in our programs to help them understand the regulatory landscape of seed production and plant breeding in Canada. Next slide, Ati. If you would like to know a bit more about SeedChange and what we do, I do encourage folks to please go on our website and check us out there. Thanks, Tim. So in closing remarks, I just wanted to sort of just leave a few words as part of my closing and some of my thought process on this. And food for thoughts too, as we embark on the rest of the conversations for this convention. You know, I'm sure folks are thinking about what are the ways we can have new conversations? What ways are we going to make sure that justice is centered in the conversations at the convention, in our farms, institutions, boardrooms across the country? How are we going to be successful? What ways are we going to make sure that it is given the power necessary to affect change? How will we win? How will we change the world? And I am not here, of course, to convince anyone why or how racism and anti-indigeneity is in the fabric of our food system. I think there are enough studies for that, but I want us to get uncomfortable. Know that you will make mistakes and that is okay. Learn from it, show up. Put your ego aside. In most instances, we just need to step out of the way for communities to do their work. Listen to learn something new. The challenge to do this is an open one. I leave you all with a quote from Bernice Johnson Reagan from Georgia. Life's challenges are not supposed to paralyze you. They're supposed to help you discover who you are. If you're in a coalition and you're comfortable, you know it's not broad enough coalition. Thank you. Thank you all very much.